The room was filled with quiet tension, the kind of silence that only comes when millions of dollars are at stake. At the long glass table, men in suits whispered to each other, their voices low but heavy with excitement. Everyone knew what was about to happen. After months of travel, late-night calls, and endless meetings, the company was finally minutes away from signing the biggest deal in its history, a deal worth $500 million. The CEO sat at the head of the table, his tie perfectly in place but his heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. On the surface he looked calm, even confident, but inside, he felt the weight of every decision that had brought him here. This was not just another business meeting. This was the deal that could place his company on the global map forever. Success meant expansion, power, and respect in boardrooms across the world. Failure meant disaster, stock prices falling, shareholders turning against him, and perhaps even losing his career. The Middle Eastern partners, dressed in immaculate white robes and shining cufflinks, sat opposite. They carried themselves with quiet authority, their faces unreadable. To them, the numbers meant more than money. It was about influence, about control, about leaving their mark in another part of the world. Yet their voices were smooth, their words polished with respect. "This is a partnership of trust," one of them said earlier, his accent heavy but his smile warm. The Americans wanted to believe him. Around the room, assistants moved quietly, placing papers neatly in front of each man. The contracts were thick, written in both English and Arabic as tradition demanded. The English version was clear. Profit would be shared, ownership divided fairly. But the Arabic script, elegant and flowing, was unreadable to most of the Western executives. They did not doubt it, though. Why would they? They had hired experts, translators, and lawyers. Everything had been checked, stamped, and approved. Or so they thought. The atmosphere inside the hotel had been one of luxury for days. Every evening, banquets filled with roasted lamb, golden plates of rice, and fountains of fruit had been laid out for the guests. Expensive perfumes floated in the air. There were gifts, gold pens, silk scarves, and rare watches, tokens of friendship and respect. The negotiators felt welcomed, almost honored. In such surroundings, it was hard to imagine betrayal. The partners were charming, generous, and full of praise. Brothers, they often called them. This is not just business, this is family. And who would doubt family? Yet beneath the polished surface, a shadow of doubt flickered in the CEO's mind. He had done this long enough to know that business was rarely what it seemed. Deals of this size were never built on trust alone. They were battles of strategy, hidden behind polite words. He tried to push the thought aside. After all, everything looked perfect. The media was already preparing headlines. The board back home was waiting for his call. Shareholders were celebrating in advance. The pressure to sign, to finish, to win was stronger than the whisper of caution inside him. As the clock ticked, the room grew heavier. The pens were placed on the table, ready for signatures. Flashbulbs from cameras waited outside, eager to capture the handshake that would seal history. It was a moment everyone had been building toward for months. Some of the younger executives leaned back in their chairs, smiling, already imagining the bonuses and promotions that would follow. To them, the deal was as good as done. But fate often hides in the smallest corners of life. In this grand hall of wealth and power, far away from the polished shoes and tailored suits, another story was quietly unfolding. In the service corridors of the hotel, a maid moved quickly, her hands busy with trays and linens. Her daughter, a bright-eyed teenager who often accompanied her mother to work, carried a stack of napkins. They were invisible to the powerful men upstairs, as unnoticed as shadows. Yet soon their lives would collide in a way no one could have predicted. For now, though, the boardroom was blind to this. Every man at the table believed the story was already written. $500 million. A handshake. A signature. A future secured. The CEO took a slow breath, adjusted his cuff, and reached for the pen. The deal was only minutes away. What he didn't know was that a single detail, hidden in a language he could not read, would soon turn triumph into chaos, and that the truth would not come from lawyers or advisors, but from the most unexpected voice of all. The signing ceremony was scheduled for the evening, but the atmosphere of trust had been carefully built for weeks. Every step of the journey, the Arab hosts had made sure the foreign guests felt not only respected but honored. From the moment the delegation landed, luxury surrounded them. Long black cars waiting at the airport, suites lined with marble and gold, and a staff that treated them like royalty. It was more than hospitality. It was a performance, a show of power and generosity that made the visitors believe they were in safe hands. Inside the hotel, every evening was a festival. Tables overflowed with roasted lamb, dates, rice fragrant with spices, and fresh juices squeezed from pomegranates. The guests laughed, their glasses raised high as their hosts told stories of friendship and brotherhood. "This partnership is more than numbers," one of the Arab businessmen often said with a warm smile. "It is about trust. It is about family." The foreign executives nodded eagerly. They wanted to believe it. After all, trust was the most valuable currency in business. The contracts had been drafted carefully. On the table lay two versions side by side, one in English, one in Arabic. The English text was precise, written with the sharp language of lawyers. It spoke of partnership, of equal ownership, of shared responsibility. Every clause seemed to protect both sides. The executives had checked it again and again. But the Arabic version, though printed on the same fine paper, was like a mystery to them. The letters curved beautifully like art, but they carried no meaning for the foreigners who stared at them. Still, they felt no fear. Translators had reviewed it, interpreters had confirmed it, and the Arab partners themselves had sworn on their honor that both versions were the same. Why should they doubt it? It was easy to trust men who had shown nothing but kindness. The Arab hosts had spared no expense. On one night, they had even taken the guests to a private desert camp where carpets stretched under the stars and musicians played soft songs on oud instruments. Bonfires glowed as men poured sweet tea into small glasses. The desert air was cool, the sky endless. "We are brothers," one of the hosts said again that night. "This deal will bind us for life." The CEO had raised his glass and smiled, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. Perhaps he thought this was more than business. Perhaps this was destiny, but destiny is not always what it seems. As the final day drew closer, the excitement grew. Journalists began gathering in the hotel lobby, preparing their cameras. The company's younger executives were already sending cheerful emails home, telling their families to expect great news. "We are about to make history," one of them wrote. In their minds, the deal was already sealed. The small details no longer mattered. The numbers were right, the signatures ready, and the trust between the two sides felt unshakable. Yet beneath the polished speeches and the gifts, the truth was hidden. The Arabic contract carried a secret, a trap written in careful words buried in long sentences waiting for a signature. It was invisible to the foreign eye, disguised in the beauty of language. What looked like a promise of partnership was in reality a quiet theft of power. The Arab version gave away more control than the English version admitted. Once signed, it would be too late, but no one at the table knew this. The translators had missed it, or perhaps looked the other way. The lawyers, too, had trusted the glossy image of friendship. Even the CEO, cautious by nature, had allowed himself to believe. After all, everything about the experience spoke of loyalty and brotherhood. They had been treated not as outsiders, but as honored guests. Doubt seemed ungrateful. Suspicion felt rude, and so the pen inched closer to paper. Meanwhile, far from the boardroom, life moved differently. In the hotel's quiet corridors, maids moved silently, cleaning rooms, carrying trays, folding sheets. To them, the grand celebrations upstairs were just noise from another world. They had their own struggles, their own small dreams. Among them was a maid who often brought her young daughter to work. The girl was bright, curious, and unlike most children her age, she had a passion for languages. At school, she had begun learning Arabic, eager to understand the culture that surrounded her. To her, the curved letters were not just decoration. They carried meaning. She did not know it yet, but her simple curiosity would soon change everything. While powerful men sat in suits, blinded by luxury and trust, the truth waited quietly in the shadows, ready to be seen by the most unexpected eyes. The clock ticked toward the moment of signing, and every second the atmosphere of trust grew thicker. Smiles grew wider, laughter grew louder, and confidence filled the air. The guests believed they had found partners for life. What they had actually found was a trap hidden in plain sight. And only a young girl, unnoticed by all, would be able to see it before it was too late. The hotel was quiet that afternoon, the air heavy with the calm before the storm. In the grand hall upstairs, contracts were waiting, pens already placed neatly on the polished table. But in the lower floors, life carried on as usual. Maids pushed their carts down long corridors, cleaning rooms and replacing towels, their voices low, their steps quick. Among them was a woman in her 40s, her uniform plain, her eyes tired but kind. She had worked in this hotel for years, and she had learned how to stay invisible. Guests rarely noticed her except to nod or ask for an extra pillow. Walking quietly beside her was her teenage daughter. The girl often came with her mother during long shifts. She carried napkins in her hands and watched everything with curious eyes. She was not like the other children her age. She was observant, always reading, always asking questions. At school, she had chosen Arabic as her subject, fascinated by the flowing letters and the mystery of the language. While her friends giggled about fashion and music, she spent hours copying strange symbols into her notebook, whispering the words under her breath until they began to make sense. Her mother worried sometimes. "Why do you waste so much time on this?" she would ask gently. But the girl always smiled. "Because I want to understand. Because I don't want to be blind to the words around me." That day, fate placed her in the right place at the right time. The delegation suites were large, filled with papers, briefcases, and the faint smell of expensive cigars. When her mother was called to tidy one of the rooms, the girl followed as usual. She placed the clean napkins on the desk, but as she did, her eyes fell on a stack of papers. They were thick, bound together with clips and covered in neat rows of Arabic script. She froze for a moment, staring. Her mother noticed and whispered sharply, "Don't touch anything. These are not ours." The girl nodded, but her eyes lingered. Something about the papers pulled at her curiosity. She had seen Arabic words in her textbooks, but these looked different, formal, legal, and serious. Her heart beat faster. She leaned closer, just enough to read the top lines. At first, the words seemed familiar. They spoke of agreement, partnership, and loyalty. But then she frowned. A phrase appeared that she had never seen in the English versions she had overheard. Ownership, majority, transfer of control. Her stomach tightened. She read again, slower this time, her lips moving without sound. The meaning was clear. In this Arabic contract, one side was given control over far more than half. It was not equal. It was not fair. It was a trap, buried in words that only someone who understood Arabic could see. The girl's eyes widened. She turned to her mother, whispering quickly. At first, the maid brushed her off. "Don't talk nonsense," she said. "These are rich men's matters. Don't get involved. We will lose our jobs if anyone hears us." But the girl grabbed her mother's arm, her voice trembling with urgency. "Mama, listen to me. The Arabic says something different. It is not the same as the English. They are going to trick them." The maid's heart raced. Fear wrapped around her. She knew the danger of speaking against powerful men. She had seen workers fired for far less, some even thrown out without pay or warning. Her job was their only income. Her daughter's education depended on it. One mistake, one wrong word, and everything could collapse. Yet as she looked into her daughter's eyes, she saw no doubt, only certainty. The girl was young, but she was not careless. If she was this sure, then something must truly be wrong. The mother bit her lip, torn between fear and duty. She wanted to protect her child, but perhaps her child was the one trying to protect everyone else. Meanwhile, upstairs, the executives were preparing for the final meeting. They laughed, shook hands, and straightened their suits, unaware that danger sat quietly in the lines of Arabic ink. The clock was ticking. Soon they would sit at the table, smile for the cameras, and sign away more than they could imagine. But in that quiet hotel room, a teenage girl had seen the truth. She was the only one who noticed, the only one who understood. And now she faced a choice: stay silent and let the trap close, or speak up and risk everything. Her heart pounded as she clutched her mother's hand. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking but firm. "We cannot let them sign. You have to tell someone. You have to." The maid's throat went dry. She knew her daughter was right. She also knew the price of interfering. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were listening. For a moment she wished she had never brought her daughter to work that day. But fate does not ask permission. Fate chooses its moments, and this was one of them. Downstairs, the men in suits were already walking toward the signing hall. Minutes remained. The girl's discovery had come just in time, but only if someone was brave enough to act on it. The girl's hands trembled as she pointed again at the Arabic words. Her mother shook her head, whispering, "Stop looking, someone will see us." But the girl could not pull her eyes away. The letters seemed to burn into her mind. She had studied just enough Arabic to understand, and what she saw frightened her more than she could explain. She read the line again, slowly, carefully, to be sure she was not making a mistake. The English contract she had heard about was supposed to promise equal partnership. But here on this page in Arabic it said something different. It gave the Arab partners more than 60% control. Control of the business, the profits, and even the future decisions. The foreigners would be left with scraps, trapped in their own agreement. It was like a silent theft hidden in plain sight. Her mother whispered angrily, "You will get us in trouble. Put the papers back." But the girl's voice was firm, low, but urgent. "Mama, this is wrong. They are going to cheat them. If they sign this, they will lose everything." The mother froze, torn between fear and the truth. She had always taught her daughter to stay quiet, to never interfere with the rich and powerful. But her daughter's eyes burned with conviction. For a moment, the maid saw not a child, but someone braver than many adults she had known. Upstairs, the guests were already gathering. The pens were lined up. The translators stood ready. Minutes remained before the contracts were placed on the table. The girl felt her chest tighten. If she stayed silent, the trap would close forever. She imagined the faces of the men in suits when they realized what had happened. Too late, broken, ruined, and she imagined the proud smiles of the hosts, walking away with victory that had been stolen. No, she thought. I cannot let this happen. She grabbed her mother's hand. Please, Mama, we have to tell them now. It doesn't matter if they get angry. It doesn't matter if they fire you. They must know. The maid's throat went dry. Her whole life had been about survival, keeping her job, feeding her daughter, staying invisible. But now, her daughter was asking her to risk everything for strangers. It made no sense. And yet, wasn't it right? If she said nothing, wouldn't she be helping the lie? Her heart pounded. She whispered back, "If we are wrong, we will lose everything. If we are right, they may not believe us. Do you understand how dangerous this is?" The girl nodded quickly. "I understand. But Mama, sometimes the truth is more important than fear." The words struck the maid like lightning. She stared at her daughter, realizing that this was no ordinary child. Her courage was far greater than her age. And in that instant, the maid made her choice. She would speak no matter the cost. Together, they hurried through the back corridors, away from the quiet service rooms, and toward the grand hall where the signing was about to take place. The maid's hands were sweating, her legs weak, but her daughter pulled her forward with surprising strength. When they reached the entrance, they could already see the room prepared for the ceremony. The long table gleamed under bright lights. Reporters waited outside the doors. The executives sat tall in their chairs, their faces glowing with confidence. And at the far end, the Arab hosts smiled like kings. The contracts, both versions, were ready. The maid hesitated at the doorway, her heart hammering. Who would believe her? She was just a worker, a servant. But before she could turn back, her daughter stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Excuse me," the girl said, her voice trembling but clear. "Please don't sign." Every head in the room turned. The executives frowned, confused. The Arab host stiffened. The CEO looked startled, almost annoyed, but something in the girl's eyes made him pause. She clutched the papers tightly in her hands. "The Arabic is not the same as the English," she said quickly. "It says they will take control. It is a trap." For a moment, the room was frozen in disbelief. The translators shifted uncomfortably. The Arab hosts exchanged glances, their smiles suddenly strained. The CEO's face darkened with suspicion. He reached for the papers. "Show me," he said. The girl handed them over, her hands shaking. The silence was thick as one of the company's legal advisors scanned the Arabic text. His eyes widened as he reached the same line. He read it once, then again, his face draining of color. The truth was out. The Arabic contract was not the same. The girl had been right. A hidden clause twisted the deal, giving the Arab side overwhelming power. It was a betrayal dressed as partnership. The room erupted in shock. Some executives gasped, others whispered angrily. The CEO slammed his hand on the table. The Arab hosts tried to speak, their voices smooth, but the damage was done. Their brotherhood had been exposed as deception. The maid stood frozen at the edge of the room, her daughter clutching her hand. She thought of the punishment that might come, the fury of powerful men. But instead the CEO turned to her, his eyes filled with something she had never expected, gratitude. And in that moment, she realized the truth. Her daughter had just saved $500 million, and maybe much more. The room was no longer calm. Moments earlier, the signing ceremony had felt like a celebration, a victory after months of planning. But now, after the young girl's words had cut through the air, everything was broken. Papers were scattered, voices rose in anger, and the atmosphere of trust had vanished like smoke. The executives from the foreign company sat stiff, their hearts pounding with shock. They had been seconds away from putting their signatures on a deal that would have destroyed them. For a brief moment, silence held the room, heavy and uncomfortable. Then the reality sank in. The Arabic version of the contract was a trap. It was a betrayal so clever, so carefully hidden that no one in the room, no lawyer, no translator, no advisor, had seen it. Except for a schoolgirl. The CEO's face was pale, but his jaw was set. He turned to his team, whispering urgently, "We must check every single page again. Not just once, line by line, word by word." His voice was sharp, full of fury and determination. There would be no more trust, no more blind faith. Every document had to be verified. For the next hour, the atmosphere became tense and frantic. The company's legal advisors worked furiously, comparing the Arabic and English versions. The sound of pages flipping filled the hall. Translators sweated as they rushed to explain each clause, and with every discovery, the truth became clearer. The Arabic text was filled with subtle traps. Ownership shifted here, responsibility twisted there, profits quietly rerouted. It was not one mistake. It was an entire web of deception. The Arab hosts tried to defend themselves. They smiled, they raised their hands, they claimed it was a misunderstanding. Their voices were smooth, polite, but their eyes betrayed unease. The foreign executives no longer listened. The mask of brotherhood had fallen. What had seemed like friendship was nothing more than a trick to steal $500 million. The CEO leaned back in his chair, his face hard. He thought of the years his company had worked for this moment. He thought of the shareholders waiting for good news. He thought of the trust he had placed in experts, lawyers, translators, and he felt a cold rage rise in his chest. How close they had come to losing everything. One signature, one careless moment, and their company would have been enslaved to a deal they could never escape. The girl and her mother sat quietly near the door, almost afraid to breathe. The maid's heart still raced. She had expected punishment, perhaps even humiliation, but instead she watched as the most powerful man in the room kept glancing at her daughter with gratitude. Without her, they would have been ruined. Without her, they would have been celebrating a victory that was actually a defeat. The weight of the moment grew heavier with every passing minute. The CEO stood, his voice cutting across the noise. From this moment forward, no contract, no matter how small, no matter how urgent, will ever be trusted without full verification. We will hire more translators, more lawyers, more eyes. We will never again be blind. His words were not just for his team, but for everyone in the room. It was a declaration of survival, born out of humiliation and fury. But the struggle was not over yet. The Arab partners were not ready to let go. They pushed back, insisting the contracts were fair, that the girl had misunderstood. They argued loudly, their pride wounded, their anger thinly veiled. To back down now would mean losing face, losing money, losing the illusion of power. And so the tension thickened. Every word became sharper, every look colder. The foreign executives, however, had been shaken awake. They no longer smiled, no longer believed in kind words or golden feasts. They had seen the trap, and now they were fighting to escape it. Their voices grew harder, their questions more pointed. Every page of the contract became a battlefield, every line a fight for survival. For the maid and her daughter, it felt like watching giants clash. They sat small and unnoticed at the edge of the storm, yet they knew the truth. It was their voices that had started this battle. The girl gripped her mother's hand tightly. Fear still lingered inside her, but pride began to grow too. She had done something no one else had dared to do. As the hours passed, exhaustion set in. The executives' suits grew wrinkled, their ties loosened, their eyes bloodshot from reading and rereading. But they did not stop. They could not stop. The thought of nearly being tricked fueled them, pushed them forward. Each time they found another trap in the Arabic text, Their anger deepened. Each time they discovered a lie, their determination sharpened. It was a fight not just for money, but for dignity. To fall for such deception would have meant shame in front of the world. To escape it now meant survival, but also a warning. Trust could no longer be given freely. From this day, every partnership would be tested, every contract torn apart word by word before a single pen touched the paper. Finally, late into the night, the CEO slammed the last folder shut. His voice was calm but deadly. "This deal is finished," he said. "We will not be signing anything tonight or ever." His words echoed through the hall. The Arab hosts stiffened, their faces cold, but they could not fight the truth. The trap had been exposed. The game was over. The maid let out a breath she had been holding for hours. Her daughter leaned against her, tired but smiling faintly. The storm had not ended yet. There would be anger, there would be consequences, but they had done the impossible. They had saved a fortune, and perhaps even a company's future, simply by daring to speak. In that moment, the girl realized something. Power did not always come from wealth or titles or expensive suits. Sometimes power came from knowledge, from courage, from refusing to stay silent. And she, the daughter of a maid, had proven it in front of the world. The night was heavy with silence after the CEO's words. The deal was broken, yet the story was not over. Everyone in the hall knew it. For the foreign executives, walking away meant saving their company, but it also meant facing the fury of men who were not used to losing. And for the Arab hosts, this was humiliation. They had prepared for months, building an illusion of trust only to see it destroyed by the voice of a maid's daughter. Pride and anger filled their eyes. The CEO stood tall at the head of the table, but inside his heart pounded. He knew this moment was dangerous. Walking away from $500 million was not just business, it was war. There would be consequences. There would be whispers in the market, questions from shareholders, maybe even threats from the hosts themselves. Yet he had no choice. Signing would have destroyed everything. The Arab partners spoke, their voices sharp now, no longer smooth with friendship. "You insult us," one said coldly. "You doubt our honor." Another leaned forward, his eyes hard. "This deal was a gift. If you walk away, you will regret it." Their words carried weight like stones dropped into still water. Around them, the translators shifted uneasily, their faces pale. The executives exchanged glances. They were businessmen, not soldiers. They had come for profit, not for conflict. Yet now they stood in the middle of a confrontation that felt far bigger than numbers on paper. Some of them whispered, "Should we stay quiet? Should we try to negotiate again?" But the CEO shook his head. His voice was steady. "No, there will be no deal. Not tonight. Not ever." The room crackled with tension. For a long moment, no one moved. Then slowly, the Arab hosts leaned back in their chairs. Their smiles returned, but they were no longer warm. They were sharp, thin, dangerous. One of them spoke softly, almost like a warning. "You came here as brothers. Now you leave as enemies. Remember this." The weight of those words hung in the air. It was not just a failed partnership anymore. It was a threat. The executives felt it in their bones. They gathered their papers quickly, avoiding eye contact, their movements stiff. The maid pulled her daughter closer, her hands trembling. She had feared losing her job, but now she feared something worse, that their courage might have placed them in real danger. The group prepared to leave the hall, but the CEO paused. His mind raced. If they left now in silence, the world might never know the truth. The Arab hosts could twist the story, spread lies, claim that it was the foreign company who had cheated. He could not allow that. He turned back to the table, his voice clear and strong. "The truth has been revealed," he said firmly. "We will not be silent about what happened here tonight. The world will know. It was a bold move, a final strike." The Arab partners' faces hardened, but they said nothing. They knew the game was lost. The executives walked out together, their steps heavy but united. The cameras outside clicked furiously as journalists tried to capture the moment. The reporters expected smiles, a handshake, the announcement of a great deal. Instead, they saw stiff faces and rushed movements. Something had gone wrong, terribly wrong, and the world would soon want answers. Inside the quiet back corridors, the maid and her daughter followed slowly, their hearts racing. The girl kept her head down, but she could not hide the truth in her eyes. She had been the one to stop it. She had been the voice that changed everything. But with that power came fear. What if the powerful men sought revenge? What if her mother lost her job tomorrow? What if speaking the truth had cost them their safety? The CEO stopped them in the hallway. For the first time, he looked directly at the girl, his expression softer now. He crouched slightly so his eyes were level with hers. "You were brave," he said. "You saved us. You saved everything." His words carried weight, but his eyes carried gratitude. The girl felt her cheeks burn. She had never been spoken to like that by someone so important. The maid lowered her gaze, whispering, "We only did what was right." Her voice shook, but inside, pride grew beside her fear. She had doubted her daughter at first, but now she understood. Sometimes even the smallest person can carry the heaviest truth. But the night was not finished. Back in the suites, the executives gathered again. They spoke in hurried voices, their nerves raw. "What now?" one asked. "The market will demand answers. The shareholders will want to know why the deal collapsed." Another shook his head. "We can't tell the full story. It will embarrass them and it could bring more danger." The CEO sat silently, his hand pressed against his forehead. He knew the risk of telling the truth. Powerful enemies could strike back in ways far worse than lost money. But he also knew silence could be equally deadly. If they kept the truth hidden, they might look weak, careless, even foolish. Either way, the road ahead was filled with shadows. As the night wore on, the executives agreed on one thing. The girl's discovery had saved them, but it had also pulled them into a storm. The deal had collapsed, the trust was broken, and now every step forward had to be taken carefully. In her small room, the maid hugged her daughter tightly. "You were right," she whispered, "and I am proud of you." The girl closed her eyes, exhausted, but her heart was light. She had seen the trap, and she had spoken the truth even when it was dangerous. Whatever came next, she would never forget that moment. And far away in the golden halls of the Arab hosts, anger burned like fire. They had been exposed, humiliated, denied their prize at the very last moment. They swore quietly among themselves that this insult would not be forgotten. The stage was set for the storm that was about to follow. The next morning, the grand hotel that had been glowing with celebration was now filled with whispers. The deal that was supposed to be the pride of the year had collapsed overnight. Reporters had caught glimpses of tense faces, hurried steps, and unfinished contracts. Something had gone wrong, but no one outside the meeting room knew the full story yet. The air was heavy with rumors. Inside the CEO's private suite, the executives sat around a table, their eyes red from lack of sleep. The night had been long and restless. They replayed the events again and again, realizing how close they had come to disaster. Just a few minutes more, just one signature, and their company would have been trapped in a nightmare worth $500 million. The CEO rubbed his temples. "We almost lost everything," he said quietly. The others nodded, still shaken. The discovery of the Arabic trap had changed everything. The foreign executives now understood just how vulnerable they had been. Trust had blinded them. Luxury, kindness, and smooth words had made them careless. It was a hard lesson, but it was better learned now than after losing control of their empire. Meanwhile, the Arab hosts were furious. They had put on a grand show, treating the delegation like brothers, hiding their deception behind silken smiles. Now that mask had been ripped away by the smallest, most unexpected voice. They had been humiliated in front of their guests, exposed like tricksters instead of leaders. Pride was everything to them, and the wound was deep. They did not shout or chase after the foreigners, but the silence of their anger was more dangerous than words. The CEO knew this. He warned his team, "We are not safe here anymore. Pack your things. We leave at once." His voice was firm. He did not want to take chances. As the executives prepared to leave, they took one last look at the contracts. The lawyers had confirmed it. The Arabic text gave away majority control. The English version was bait. The Arabic version was the trap. The young girl had been right all along. Without her, everything would have been lost. Before leaving, the CEO asked to see the maid and her daughter. They were brought quietly to the suite. The maid stood nervously, her eyes lowered, afraid that trouble might still come. But the CEO surprised her. He walked up to the girl, his expression serious, and said, "You saved us. You saved my company, my people, and our future." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I will never forget this." The girl blushed, unable to find the right words. She had not done it for praise or reward. She had simply spoken the truth because she could not remain silent. But the weight of what she had done was now clear to her. She had stopped one of the biggest betrayals in business history. The maid's eyes filled with tears. For years she had been invisible, just another worker cleaning rooms and carrying trays. But now for the first time she felt seen. Her daughter's courage had given them both a place in a story far greater than their own lives. The delegation left the hotel under heavy security. The journalists outside shouted questions, but the CEO gave no answers. He only said, "The deal is off." Cameras flashed, but no one knew the truth yet. Behind closed doors, however, the executives were already planning their next move. They would report everything back home. They would make sure the world knew about the attempted betrayal. On the flight back, the team sat quietly, staring out the windows at the endless clouds. They were exhausted, but they were also grateful. Their company had been saved. $500 million had been protected, and the lesson was carved deep into their hearts. Never again would they take words on paper at face value, no matter how beautiful or convincing they seemed. Back in the Middle East, the Arab hosts sat in silence, their faces dark with rage. They had lost more than money. They had lost face, and face was everything. They had been caught, exposed by a child. It was a wound they would never forget. But the world moves quickly, and soon the news would spread. Once the story reached the markets, their reputation would be questioned. Who would trust them again after such a trick? For the maid and her daughter, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but nothing was the same. People whispered about them in the hotel corridors, some with admiration, some with envy. The mother still worried that they might face punishment, but the CEO had promised to protect them. And the girl, she carried herself a little taller now. She had discovered the power of knowledge, the strength of speaking up even when her voice shook. In the end, the truth shattered the deal. $500 million slipped away, but so did the trap that would have destroyed far more. It was not a victory of contracts or signatures. It was a victory of courage, of honesty, of a child's voice rising above the noise of power. And as the CEO looked out of the plane window, he whispered to himself, "We were saved by the most unlikely guardian." His mind replayed the moment the girl had spoken, her small voice breaking through a room of giants. It was a reminder he would carry forever. Sometimes the greatest protection comes from where you least expect it. The deal was gone, but the story was far from forgotten. In the weeks that followed, whispers turned into headlines. Newspapers in different countries wrote about the collapsed $500 million agreement. Some reporters claimed it was a matter of pride. Others spoke about hidden clauses and mistranslations. No one outside the room knew the full truth, but the rumor that something dark had been uncovered refused to die. For the company, the escape became a turning point. At first, there was worry. Shareholders questioned why the deal had failed, and critics accused the CEO of losing a historic opportunity. But soon the truth began to surface. Quiet leaks told of a dangerous clause, of an unfair contract, of a trap avoided at the very last moment. And as the story grew, people began to see the CEO not as a man who lost a deal, but as a leader who had protected his company from betrayal. Behind the scenes, new rules were made. Every contract, no matter how small, had to be translated and checked by at least 3 independent experts. No one was allowed to sign a paper without full understanding. The company became stricter, smarter, and more cautious, and the CEO always reminded his team, "We came within minutes of disaster. Never again will we allow trust to blind us." But in the middle of this global storm, 2 quiet figures slipped back into ordinary life. The maid returned to her work at the hotel, pushing her cart down the long corridors, carrying trays, folding sheets. On the surface, nothing had changed. She was still invisible to most of the guests, still just another worker in a uniform. But inside she felt different. She carried a secret pride, a memory that no one could take away. She had been there the night her daughter's voice saved an empire. And the daughter, she could not stop thinking about what had happened. She had always loved languages, but now she understood their true power. A few words read by the right eyes could change the course of history. She began to study harder, pouring herself into her books. At school, when teachers asked her why she worked so hard, she smiled and said simply, "Because one day someone will need me to see the truth again." Years passed. The world moved on to other stories, other scandals, other deals. But for the CEO, the memory of that night never faded. He often told his new employees about it during training sessions. Once, he would say, "We were saved not by lawyers, not by advisors, not by money but by the courage of a young girl who refused to stay silent. His words became a legend inside the company, a reminder that truth can come from the most unexpected places. And for the maid's daughter, the future opened like a door. Inspired by what she had done, she studied law. She worked long nights, read endless books, and pushed through every challenge. People told her it was too difficult, too expensive, too far from her reach. But she remembered the boardroom, the polished table, the powerful men frozen by her words. She remembered how knowledge had given her a voice stronger than gold, and she refused to give up. When she finally became a lawyer, she specialized in international contracts. Clients came to her with papers thick with legal jargon, and she tore through them with sharp eyes. She became known for her honesty, her precision, and her refusal to be fooled by pretty words. In every case she took, she carried the memory of the night she stopped a $500 million betrayal. Her mother watched with pride, remembering the day when she had been afraid to let her daughter speak. Now she understood. Courage is not about being fearless. It is about standing for what is right, even when fear is all around you. The story of the failed deal remained a warning in the business world. Executives whispered about it at conferences, calling it the night of the Arabic trap. Some laughed nervously, others shook their heads. But all of them agreed. It was proof that one small mistake could destroy everything. And hidden beneath those whispers was the untold truth, that the savior of that night had been not a man in a suit, but the daughter of a maid. In the end, the legacy was not the broken deal or the anger it caused. The real legacy was the lesson. Power does not always rest in wealth or titles. Sometimes it rests in knowledge. Sometimes it rests in courage. Sometimes it rests in the quiet voice of someone brave enough to speak when everyone else stays silent. And so, the story closes not in the glittering halls of the hotel, nor in the offices of powerful men, but in the simple truth that saved them all. One girl, one discovery, one choice to tell the truth. She had no idea her voice would echo so far, but it did. It echoed in the company's survival, in the new policies they built, in the lives she later touched as a lawyer, and in the reminder that even the smallest person can change the course of history. The $500 million deal never happened, but something greater did. A hidden trap was exposed, a company was saved, and a young girl learned the strength of her own voice. And in that voice was a legacy that would last forever.